So I recently did this small betta fish study here. I actually did this study because I'm working on a painting of a mermaid. I thought that the best fish to study for this mermaid painting would be a betta fish because they have really pretty fins and they just look really like majestic and cool. So I thought I'd do a betta fish study. I don't think I've ever painted a fish before, but I kind of wanted to talk about my thought process when doing this study and kind of explain how I painted it. And I'm like fairly happy with how it turned out. I could push it more, but like I'm satisfied with this betta fish study. And I think I did learn more about like the structure of the fins and the scales and like how to go about painting the different features. So I wanted to explain kind of step by step how I approached painting this betta fish so you can follow along, and I'd actually recommend you can either work from the same photo I did, which I show in the video, or you can find your own reference photo of a fish or anything else and kind of just follow along with the concepts and then paint your own fish. And if you do a fish study, let me know how it turns out because I want to see it. Let me know if this helps at all or if anything's confusing. So yeah, I'm going to explain how to paint a fish step by step. So let's go. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is definitely get a reference photo. And if you can, try to find a reference photo where the highlights aren't like blown out to completely white and the shadows aren't totally dark and completely black and you can't see any detail in the shadows. Honestly, the one I use kind of isn't that great, but I just thought it looked interesting. So, do whatever you want. If you like a picture and you really want to use it as a reference, then just go for it. Who cares? This stage is called the block-in because you are blocking in the main shapes of whatever subject you're drawing. So this is sort of how I'm looking at and analyzing the reference photo in my mind. I am breaking up the contour of the shapes into straight lines and trying to analyze where on the shape does the line change and start going a different direction. So I've pointed those areas out on the body with little dots, and obviously you can see that my lines here aren't as straight as those lines that I showed in the example photo, but it's kind of, you want those relationships to stay the same while you're painting. It's hard to know exactly where things should go at first, but you can always just put something down, and if you decide later that the relationship isn't quite correct, then you just wipe it away and redo it. Once you are happy with your lines, you can start putting down the colors that you see on your reference photo. But you want to be super vague. This is kind of just like a nice base for us to work into with like the average color of the area. So if you want, you can blur your reference photo, like I'll show you an example here, which I do sometimes, or you can just squint your eyes. So for example, I mixed sort of a light blue color that I see on a lot of different parts of the fish, and then I put it kind of everywhere that I sort of saw it. And you can see I'm like on those bottom fins, I put that light blue color like further than it actually is. But again, this doesn't need to be perfect. It's just a nice base for us to work into, and it'll kind of help the other colors. So we're pretty much just trying to get the whole fish covered at this point with paint. And you don't want to be too precious about anything. Just kind of like put the colors where you see them. Okay, so once you have your base layer down, you can then blend everything out with some sort of blending brush. You could use a fan brush, or you can use like an old splayed out brush. It's up to you. But yeah, I'm just blending everything, and I'm trying to go along the form. So like for the fins, I'm going out from like where they're coming out from the body, just to make sure the colors are sort of spreading out in the right direction. But yeah, you don't need to be like too precious with this because again, we're pretty much going to be painting over all of this. It's just a nice little base layer for the the paint on top to kind of blend into. Okay, so now it is time to start adding more details. We kind of start out being super general and just putting down the general colors that we see, and then we get more and more specific with the details that we're painting. So I kind of focus in on one area at a time. So I'm starting with the upper fin for now, and you can either start with the darkest areas that you see or the lightest areas, or I'm kind of doing both, honestly. But yeah, so again, I'm in this stage, I'm still kind of squinting my eyes and trying to see where are the brightest highlights and the darkest shadows on that fin. And is there any small color variation that I can include? Is an area more green, and maybe I'll mix a tiny bit of green into whatever paint pile I'm working in? Or is this area slightly darker? I'll mix slightly darker paint into whatever paint I'm working in. So yeah, we're just slowly getting more and more detailed, but still squinting your eyes, because again, there's a lot of detail to cover through the whole painting. So we don't want to get too overwhelmed. And I'm also trying to see if there are any patterns in the lights and the shadows for the area that I'm painting that I can observe in my reference photo. For example, in this betta fish, I was looking at the upper fin, and I noticed that, okay, there are these more firm ridges kind of separated by this area of looser fin material that's maybe more similar to like cloth. You can see that there are little wrinkles in the material. And so looking at the ridges specifically, we can see that there's a light area on the ridge that's more facing the light, and then that's right next to a shadow. And so I want to keep this in mind when I'm painting the ridges along the fins. That is generally a true relationship for the little ridged areas of the fins. And then the loose material between those ridges is lighter or darker depending on like where it is on the fin or if it's facing the light. So here you can see that I am adding those light areas that I see on those ridges of the upper fin, but making sure that they're right next to a darker area to keep that relationship true that I just talked about. And then here I'm working on the background. I knew I wanted a dark background. I just like the way that looks. But I'm trying to perfect kind of that outline of the fish with that dark background. So that's why I am adding it in while the paint is still wet. So you can kind of use the background almost as an eraser to kind of carve in edges in the fin and make it look closer to your reference photo. So now I'm moving on to the main body of the fish. And again, we had a nice base down for the general colors of the fish, but you can see looking at the reference photos, there are like really light areas on the body of the fish where the light is hitting more directly, and then there are shadows. So I'm just trying to kind of push everything and add lighter colors where I see them, and then add darker colors where I see them. So yeah, just always observing your reference photo and seeing what relationships you can push on your actual painting. Here I'm sort of implying the scales by kind of dabbing the paint here, which works pretty well, because seeing that small little picture of the reference photo, you can see that the scales aren't really well defined. Like seeing it so small, it just kind of looks like this not super smooth texture. So by dabbing the paint this way, I can kind of imply that there are scales without spending much of time like outlining each individual scale, which I do kind of end up doing. But again, I focus on those details later. So right now I'm just trying to imply as much as I can without adding too much detail. And then now I am adding sort of the outline of the shadows of some of the scales. So by putting just a little bit of detail in some areas, it can kind of trick your eye to see that same detail in other areas where I haven't put it. And then here I am kind of filling in some of those scales on the body of the fish. Again, to kind of imply more detail than there actually is. I'm not going over every single scale. I'm just kind of implying some scales on the fish. Another thing I like to keep in mind is that you don't want the outline of your fish and the fins to be super smooth. So you can see I was going over that upper edge of the fish with lighter colors where the scales, because the scales have like a topography, they're overlapping each other. And so by pushing that, I can make the fish look a little bit more realistic instead of like having that upper part of the fish be like super smooth. So that's a little trick you can do. Okay, so in the next steps, I'm really just repeating what I've already done, just going over all of the other fins that I haven't touched yet. Again, always looking at your reference photos, seeing if there are any patterns that you can pick up, and then keeping those in mind when you're painting your fish. This isn't photorealism. I'm not exactly copying my reference photo. Some of my fins aren't exactly what is in the reference photo, but as long as those relationships are the same, you can kind of get away with, you know, sort of doing what you want as long as everything makes sense. I guess something I noticed for these lower fins that I wanted to keep in mind when painting is that the loose material between the different ridges, it gets really light. And I think this is where some of the fins in the background are kind of overlapping, making them look more white, which you can see in this one area specifically. The smooth material between those ridges does tend to be lighter, especially near the lower part of the fin. And then also some of the ridges tend to have this like lighter center surrounded by a darker, more saturated red color. So I want to keep that in mind too, but I might not, you know, push those details until later in the painting. But again, just observing what patterns I can see and keeping those in mind when painting. So yeah, this was the entire painting process for the first day painting the fish. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do another pass on the fish originally, but I ended up adding more details once this layer of paint dried. But yeah, I think the study itself was useful, and I definitely, you know, learned a lot about the sort of anatomy and the structure of like the fins of the fish and the scales, which is why I wanted to do this study, to be able to make a better and more convincing looking mermaid. And I think doing studies just helps your observation skills as well and picking up on different patterns. But yeah, I had a fun time painting this little fish, and here is the painting after this first pass that I went through in this video. Please let me know if you're interested in a follow-up where I push the details more and get the fish to that final state that I show at the beginning of the video. I might do that video next. And let me know if you have any questions that you want me to answer. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.